She smiled at me, her eyes soft with memories. "You look just like your father, but sweeter." In that moment, I knew this was no ordinary meeting. I hadn't stepped into my friend's house in years. College, part-time jobs, and everything else had kept us drifting in and out of touch. So when I finally rang that familiar bell, I didn't know what to expect, except maybe the same warm scent of polished wood and fresh laundry that used to greet me when we were kids. The door opened, and it wasn't my friend standing there. It was his mother. She carried herself with a calm grace, the kind that comes from a life lived with both discipline and softness. Her dark hair, loosely pinned, framed her face in gentle waves. There was something striking about the way she looked at me, like I wasn't just a guest at her door but someone who had returned from a long journey. For a moment, she studied me in silence, her gaze tracing the lines of my face. Then her lips curved into a smile that was both tender and unsettling in its warmth. "You look just like your father," she said quietly, almost to herself. And then her smile deepened. "But sweeter." The words hit me harder than I expected. My father, he was someone people often described as sharp, commanding, sometimes even intimidating. To be compared to him, but softened in her eyes. I didn't quite know how to react. My throat tightened, though I forced a small laugh, unsure what to say. Before I could find words, she stepped aside and touched my arm lightly, guiding me in. Her hand was cool at first, but the brief press of her fingers left a lingering warmth, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of your own skin. Inside, the house felt familiar yet different. The family pictures had been updated, frames of my friend as a boy now stood beside newer ones of him in graduation robes. A vase of fresh lilies sat on the entry table, their fragrance subtle but elegant, like her. As she closed the door behind us, I caught her watching me again, her eyes softer now, almost reflective. I realized then that it wasn't just my father she saw in me. It was time itself, circling back, reminding her of younger years and people she had once known. And though nothing had really happened, just a smile, a sentence, a touch on the arm, something in the air between us felt altered. Not inappropriate, not heavy, but charged in a way I couldn't quite define. That was the first moment I began to sense there was more waiting between us than simple hospitality. A quiet story had just begun, and neither of us had said enough to stop it. It was almost too easy to forget why I had come. My friend had gone upstairs to grab something, leaving me alone in the living room with her. The space felt warm and lived in, sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting golden patterns on the carpet, and somewhere in the background a clock ticked steadily, marking the stillness between us. "Tea?" she asked, her voice carrying that effortless calm of someone used to taking care of others. I nodded, and she disappeared briefly into the kitchen before returning with a tray. The soft clink of porcelain filled the silence as she poured. I noticed how precise her movements were, measured, graceful, almost like a ritual. When she handed me the cup, her fingertips grazed mine, and though the touch lasted less than a second, it carried the same charge as before, like an echo of something neither of us named. The tea was fragrant, steam curling gently upward, carrying hints of cardamom and honey. We talked then, lightly at first. She asked about my studies, my work, what I'd been doing with myself. But there was a depth to the way she listened. Her eyes stayed fixed on mine as if each word mattered, as if she wasn't simply passing time until her son came back but was invested in hearing me. At one point, I told her about the pressures I'd been feeling, how everyone expected me to have life figured out already. She tilted her head slightly, the corners of her lips curving into the faintest smile. "That never changes," she said softly. "People always expect more. But don't rush. Life isn't a race, it's a rhythm." Her words lingered in me, as though she wasn't just giving advice but offering a piece of herself. And when she laughed, low, genuine, the kind of laugh that made her shoulders relax, I found myself wanting to make her laugh again, just to see that light in her eyes. For a moment, as she leaned forward, resting her chin against her palm, her gaze didn't waver. It wasn't overt, not intentional, but something unspoken hung between us. I became aware of the quiet thud of my own heartbeat, the warmth of the teacup grounding me. When my friend finally returned, the spell broke, but the air still held a trace of it, the easy comfort, the spark of awareness. I realized then that her company was unlike anyone else's. Being near her didn't just feel natural. It felt necessary. And that unsettled me more than I was ready to admit. Later that evening, I found myself wandering toward the back of the house, drawn by the faint rustle of leaves outside. The garden had always been her pride, and even now it seemed lovingly tended, rows of roses glowing softly in the dusk, the faint hum of crickets settling into the night. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and blossoms, grounding and almost hypnotic. I sat on the wooden bench beneath the porch light, letting the quiet swallow me. But it wasn't long before I heard the gentle sweep of the sliding door. She stepped out, wrapped in a pale shawl, the fabric draped loosely around her shoulders. Her presence alone shifted the atmosphere, the garden no longer just a space, but a stage that belonged to her. "It's peaceful here at night," she said, lowering herself gracefully beside me. The bench dipped slightly under her weight, bringing us close enough that the fabric of her shawl brushed against my sleeve. For a moment, we simply sat, listening. The world outside the fence seemed far away, no traffic, no voices, just the rhythm of night. She turned toward me, her profile lit softly by the amber glow of the porch light. The light made her features appear gentler, almost fragile, though her posture remained composed. She asked about my plans, where I saw myself in 5 years, what I wanted to do beyond the surface answers I gave most people. I found myself speaking more honestly than I expected. About doubts, the pressure of expectations, the uncertainty that gnawed at me when I thought too long about the future. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful, her eyes steady. There was no judgment there, only patience, the kind that made my words come easier. When I faltered, embarrassed at admitting how lost I sometimes felt, she placed her hand lightly on my arm. Just a touch, steady and reassuring. "You don't need to have all the answers yet," she murmured. "Some things reveal themselves in their own time." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw not just the confident woman who carried herself with grace, but someone who knew loneliness, who carried her own quiet uncertainties beneath her calm. For the first time, I felt the gap in years not as distance, but as a bridge. She had walked paths I hadn't yet reached, and somehow, sitting there, she was offering me a glimpse of them. The night air cooled around us, but the space between us felt warmer than ever, charged with something neither of us dared name. The garden had grown quiet around us, as if the night itself was leaning in to listen. The faint chirp of crickets, the distant hum of the city, all of it faded into the background as her voice lowered, softer now, edged with something she usually kept hidden. "I used to sit out here every evening when my son was small," she said, her gaze drifting toward the roses. "He'd run circles around the garden until he was out of breath. The house felt so full then, full of noise, of life." Her smile was gentle but tinged with ache, like a photograph you keep even though it hurts to look at. I listened, not sure if she even wanted a response. There was a vulnerability in her tone, the kind that made silence feel like the only respectful answer. When she turned back toward me, her eyes shone faintly in the porch light, and I realized she wasn't speaking just for herself. She was offering me a piece of her solitude, allowing me to see her not as someone's mother, but as a woman with her own quiet aches. Without thinking, I spoke too. Words spilled out that I rarely admitted even to friends. "Sometimes I feel like I'm already behind. Like everyone else has a plan, and I'm still, drifting." My voice caught on the last word, heavier than I meant. I almost regretted saying it. But she didn't dismiss it, didn't laugh the way some might. Instead, she nodded, her expression thoughtful, her presence steady. Then, in a gesture so simple yet profound, she reached across the small space between us and laid her hand over mine. Her palm was warm, grounding, her fingers resting lightly but firmly against the back of my hand. It wasn't romantic in intent, not overtly, but the effect was undeniable. A thread of calm ran through me, quieting the restless churn I usually carried. Yet beneath that calm, something else flickered, an awareness, sharp and delicate at once. "You're not behind," she said softly. "Life isn't a straight path. You're allowed to take time to figure it out. And you don't have to carry that weight alone." Her thumb moved slightly, an almost imperceptible shift that felt like reassurance and something more all at once. The porch light hummed faintly above us, the night pressing closer, and for the first time, I felt as if the space we shared had changed shape. It was no longer her garden, her bench, her story. It was ours, woven for a moment in honesty, quiet and fragile, but undeniable. The night stretched on, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave the bench. The roses swayed lightly in the breeze, their faint perfume drifting between us, mixing with the cool air. We had said enough to feel closer than we should have been, and yet it was the silence that bound us tighter now, thick, charged, and humming with all the words we dared not speak. She kept her hand near mine, though no longer touching. The absence was louder than the touch itself had been, like an echo still vibrating through me. I became painfully aware of how close our knees were, the thin brush of fabric against fabric. Neither of us moved away. If anything, I felt the space between us narrowing without a single step being taken. I glanced at her, and caught her looking at me. She didn't turn away immediately this time. Her lips parted slightly, as if she meant to say something, then pressed together again. Her eyes lingered on me with a softness that carried both hesitation and something I couldn't mistake, longing, perhaps, or the dangerous edge of it. The air around us felt suspended, like the world was waiting. Every detail sharpened, the glow of the porch light tracing the fine lines near her eyes, the rhythmic sway of her shawl against her arm, the sound of her quiet breathing. I thought of how those lines weren't marks of age but markers of life, evidence of laughter, of tears, of years I hadn't lived yet. I wanted to speak, to ease the tension with some careless remark, but my voice refused me. And maybe silence was better, because in silence, nothing could be denied. The night itself seemed to conspire with us, the crickets forming a steady chorus that filled the spaces we left empty. She finally looked away, her gaze falling to the roses, but her hand twitched as if she almost reached for mine again. Almost. Instead, she drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, as though to remind herself of a boundary. Yet even that small motion betrayed her conflict. I sat frozen, torn between respect and desire, between the comfort of leaving things untouched and the ache of wanting them to change. And though nothing happened, no words, no kiss, no declaration, I knew we had crossed something invisible. The pull was undeniable now. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't acted upon, but it wrapped itself around us, delicate and dangerous. And once felt, it couldn't be undone. Eventually, the night grew too cool to ignore. The breeze carried a chill that settled on our skin, reminding us that time had passed unnoticed. She rose first, gathering her shawl closer, and I followed, reluctant to break the quiet spell of the garden. The path back to the house felt shorter than before, our footsteps soft against the stone, our silence full but not empty. Inside, the warmth of the living room wrapped around us again, but it didn't erase the charged stillness that clung to the air. She walked with me to the door, as if it were the natural conclusion, though her movement seemed unhurried, as if she too wasn't ready for the night to end. I lingered by the doorway, my hand resting against the frame. The words I might have said, "Thank you, good night, I should go," stuck somewhere in my throat. Instead, I looked at her, really looked, and found her gaze already on me. There was no mask of politeness now, no shield of casual hospitality. Only openness, and something fragile beneath it. She stepped closer, close enough that the faint scent of mint tea lingered between us. For a moment, her hand lifted but hesitated in the air, as though deciding whether to retreat or continue. Finally, with a quiet resolve, her fingers reached me. She smoothed a strand of hair back from my forehead, a gesture so tender, so natural, that my breath caught. Her touch lingered, her palm brushing lightly against my temple, her thumb resting for a heartbeat too long. It wasn't just affection, it was an unspoken recognition, a moment where the line between care and longing blurred. I felt the weight of it in my chest, the quiet thunder of my heartbeat echoing in the stillness. She must have heard it too, or sensed it, because her expression softened, a faint sadness and warmth mingling in her eyes. Then, with a breath that sounded almost like surrender, she leaned forward. Her lips brushed my cheek, barely, delicately, yet it sent a rush of warmth through me as if it had been far more. The kiss wasn't bold, wasn't claimed, it was tentative, layered with meanings unspoken. When she pulled back, her face remained close, her eyes searching mine as though to see if she had gone too far. But I didn't move, couldn't move. The only thing I managed was a faint, trembling smile that mirrored hers. "Good night," she whispered, her voice carrying more weight than the word itself. And as I stepped into the cool night air, the warmth of her touch clung to me, refusing to fade. The walk home that night felt different. The streets I had known for years looked unfamiliar, as though some invisible line had been crossed, not outside, but inside me. The cool air bit gently at my skin, yet I carried a warmth that no breeze could touch. Her voice, her smile, her touch, they played over in my mind in fragments, looping until I wondered if I'd imagined them. Lying in bed later, the quiet of my room felt heavier than usual. I replayed the way her hand had brushed my hair back, the way her lips had rested on my cheek as though testing the weight of an unspoken truth. I touched the spot lightly, still feeling the ghost of her presence. It was nothing more than a gesture, simple on the surface, but it had left an imprint far deeper than I could explain. I thought of her words in the garden, "You don't have to carry that weight alone." There had been no promises, no confessions, yet the intimacy we shared lingered stronger than any declaration. It wasn't desire alone, it was connection, delicate and undeniable. Somewhere in that same house, she must have been settling into her own quiet. I imagined her in her room, the shawl folded neatly over a chair, the faint perfume of roses and tea still clinging to her skin. Perhaps she sat by the window, letting the night breeze in, thinking of how strange it felt to open herself in ways she hadn't for years. Perhaps she, too, touched her cheek where the moment had lingered, and smiled quietly to herself. It struck me then how precarious it all was. She was my friend's mother, a woman whose life had been shaped by years and experiences I hadn't yet reached. The world around us would never understand, might even condemn, what had unfolded in small, tender steps. And yet, none of that erased the truth of what I felt, the way her presence steadied me, the way her gaze made me feel seen in a way few ever had. By the time I finally closed my eyes, the line of her words echoed once more, "You look just like your father, but sweeter." It was more than a comparison, it was a recognition, a quiet confession wrapped in affection. The story between us wasn't destined for declarations or dramatic endings. It wasn't about crossing boundaries recklessly. It was about the quiet spaces where two people found comfort, where silence carried more than words, where touch spoke louder than promises. And in that truth, however fragile, I found a strange peace.